Tabo would have said what the purpose of the interview. Like it's an open-ended thing about your leadership. About we'll ask you issues about direction of the country. Just a whole lot of
sure.
Yeah. But
please feel free.
How long do we have again? An hour.
An hour.
An hour. Cool.
Yeah, but caucus starting at 10.
Okay. So. Lovely. Yeah. Lovely. So. You were interim leader for about a year?
About a year, yeah.
Yeah, and you've been leader now for elected 5 months or so.
November, 4 months.
Since 4 months, yeah. Maybe let's start with an assessment of how you assess the party and your time at the helm.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think I inherited the party at a very difficult time.
Yeah.
It was a difficult decision to make to stand for the leadership. And when the leader walks out and trashes the party the way that it was done, you've got two choices. Either the party was going to fold, or people who've been involved pick up the banner. And there's having been involved with the party for over 21 years.
Yeah.
I said, well, I'm not prepared to sit and watch the party just fall apart. So I said, well, I've got to lead it. So that's what I did, and I've spent most of last year with the federal executive and the other office bearers rebuilding and refocusing the party after the 2019 election result, and making sure that we fix those fundamental problems that were identified in the review panel report that was adopted by the Federal Council that had been presented, and making sure that those recommendations were installed, fixing the systems of the party, and getting us ready for the 2021 local government elections. And that's sort of been the focus. So last year was very inwardly focused, fixing the systems, policy conference, leadership race, and this year, as you've noticed, we've started right from the beginning an outward focus on solutions to fix the country, plans to move things forward. So it's been tough, but rewarding. I think that's starting to see some results, and winning back control in Nelson Mandela Bay and winning back control in Tshwane, certainly been highlights of that time.
You're right. A leader of the party did leave the party and went on to trash it, which is very unusual for such a thing to happen. What built up in that process leading up to such a dramatic moment? How would you characterize it? Was it in that much of turmoil that had to happen, that the implosion of that sort had to happen?
Well, look, I think that after any election, when there's a result that's not, when the party goes backwards, it's got to be introspection. You can do one of two things. You can treat it as an outlier moment and carry on doing what you've always done, or you can listen to the message that voters have sent you and adjust course accordingly. And I'm very glad that we chose to adjust course accordingly, because I think it's going to give us an opportunity to be able to move forward, in these next elections. And it's not an ideal situation, but it is the reality, and you've got to deal with it and manage that situation as best as possible.
You talk about fixing the systems in the party. What did you find to be the greatest weakness in that assessment?
I think there's been, the party had a lot of infighting and internal churn for a variety of reasons. There was unhappiness as well with the way in which the Federal Legal Commission processes had taken place, and that had caused a great deal of friction within the party. I think that the party had become complacent where we were in government, and had, I think, strayed away from getting the basics right of being able to communicate a coherent message to voters. I think that the election campaign in 2019.
Hello. Alexander.
Hello.
You'll just shoot some pictures while you're talking.
So I think that the party became unable to deliver a coherent message, which is one of the fundamental points that a political party has to do. Voters don't have time to digest huge chunks. They've got to understand by looking at your poster, and being able to understand your message. And the DA, tried to focus too much on the trick shots rather than getting the basics right. Any team can do well in trick shots, but if you're not fit and you don't know your basics, your drills, then you're going to end up doing badly. So the last election campaign, the messaging was way too diffused. People didn't really know what and who the DA was standing for, what we were trying to achieve. If you look at the two parties that did better in these last elections, the EFF and the Freedom Front, both of them were absolutely unambiguous about who they were and what they were standing for. So when you saw an EFF poster, you knew that it was the Socialist Party of the left fighting for land and jobs. The Freedom Front fighting back for minority rights. Very clear, very unambiguous. There was the DA in the middle, a job in every home, closed borders, 5 different posters, different messages in Joburg and Cape Town. And I think people just looked at the DA and said, well, I don't really know, is this a party that actually is speaking to me or for me? And so I think that getting that messaging back right and the basics right.
But John, wasn't that part of the party that was trying to grow, beyond where it was? Wasn't that, the whole campaign that you're talking about? Wasn't it part of the DA's sort of the growth that especially started under Helen and then Musi, etc.? Wasn't the DA just trying to be much more broad in terms of appeal?
Well, I think in politics you can't be everything to everybody, because in the end you end up being nothing to nobody. And I just think that it just is parties have to be very, very clear and unambiguous. Otherwise, you're not going to grow. So your base looks at you and say, well, I'm not sure you really speaking to us anymore. Potential voters look at you and say, well, what are you really saying to me about the key issues? And I think we ended up having this wishy-washy campaign that, in trying to appeal to everybody, ended up not appealing to anybody. And I think the results speak for that. There was no major growth into new markets, and there was a retreat in terms of the base. So we lost on the swings and the roundabouts. Generally in politics, when you make a trade-off within a party, you say, well, I'm going to lose on the swings, I'll gain on the roundabouts. Well, we lost on both.
So, John, in your own way, who does the DA want to appeal to? There's criticism that the DA has increasingly become a party that now stands for the minority interests.
Well, I think that's an unfair analysis, and it's also not borne out by the facts. And one only has to pick up any one of the DA's policy documents that were adopted last year to understand who we're speaking out for. Certainly none of those conservative voters fall into the category of 30 million South Africans trapped in poverty. We want to speak for people who don't have a voice at the table, who feel marginalized and left out. We have an insider-outsider economy where a very small elite works actively to exclude 30 million other South Africans from opportunity. And they don't have a voice around the cabinet table. They don't have a voice in government circles. I want to be able to give them a voice, which is why our redress policies focus so sharply on lifting those 30 million people out of poverty and into opportunity, and why our redress model focuses on those people. And then, of course, we want to bring together South Africans who believe in our core values of non-racialism, on respect for the rule of law, building a capable state, and building an inclusive economy with greater opportunities for more South Africans. Anyone who shares those values is in our marketplace, and those are the people that we're looking to target. So this notion that the DA is spending all of its time trying to regain conservative voters is just simply not true. It's not borne out by the facts either. If one looks at any one of our documents, it just completely disproves that theory. Our job is twofold. First of all, it's to win back the trust of people who lost trust in the DA in the last elections, but also to win the trust of people who've never voted for the party before by putting on the table a compelling alternative vision for South Africa that can show them the ladder of opportunity from where they are to where we can get them. And that is why you would have noticed over the course of the last year and a half, there's been a distinct focus and move away from just critiquing the governing party, but putting on the table alternatives, whether it was the ASONA, the alternative budget, the COVID-19 action plan for an incapable state, the smart lockdown model, the blue book that we launched on a ministry-by-ministry approach to combating COVID-19. All of these are focused on being able to demonstrate to South Africans that there is an alternative to the low growth, high debt, high unemployment trajectory that we're on, and that we can get onto a trajectory of hope that will see the economy growing and ensure that we can share the proceeds of that growth with more people in South Africa than currently have access to it.
You say you are not a party that a party of minorities. You say that your focus is on uplifting people that are poor, and coming up with alternative policies and solutions. There's been raging debates in the DA, and one of the reasons why also there was an implosion after the elections was on the issue of race itself, and there have been subsequent debates and disagreements on the issue of race. What is your own characterization? Because the prevalent view, I mean, not to judge the prevalent view, but the fact on the ground is that poverty mostly afflicts black people, and the poverty in this country is race-based.
Mm-hmm.
And that to address issues of poverty, you cannot run away from issues of race. You cannot run away from looking at race the way it is and how races are characterized in this country. But then the DA has gone then to say that we don't see race. It confuses me.
No, we don't not see race, and I think that's a mischaracterization of the position. We believe in non-racialism, so that everybody in South Africa, regardless of the color of their skin, should have an equality of opportunity in the country. Anyone who doesn't see race in South Africa is frankly not living in reality. What our policy says is that any policy intervention to deal with inequality and an acknowledgement that of the 30 million South Africans who are trapped in poverty, 99.8% of them are black South Africans. So that our policy recognizes that. We believe that policies to address inequality need to be measured on how they've been able to deal with that inequality. Race-based policies under the current guise of BBBEE have widened inequality over the last 2 decades. Black South African households are 10% poorer than they were after 2 decades of these policies. What we've created is a very small elite of super empowered individuals who earn a great deal of money, who keep getting contracts, who keep being empowered because they are connected insiders, and because this current stitch up between big business and the connected elite and government excludes then the 30 million people from opportunity. So our view is, if you focus your metric on poverty, focus on empowerment on poverty, when you do so, you automatically 99.8% of the beneficiaries of those policies are going to be black. But it's going to automatically then exclude the current elite who have benefited greatly and who are not in need of those empowerment policies. People like Patrice Motsepe don't need any more empowerment from government. The people who desperately need it are the people who are locked out of that opportunity.
But let's leave BBBE for a minute, because obviously it's also been implemented very badly in this country. But you guys are against race-based policies, and affirmative action, for example, is race-based policy. Quotas for disadvantaged players is a race-based policy. Now, how do you uplift people that have been systematically excluded based on race, while then you say that you are opposed to race-based policies?
Because race-based policies have not helped those people at all. Can you show me one of those 30 million people who lives under 1,000 rand a month who benefited from race-based policies or from quotas or from the like? Those are the people who are the people who are in need of government's empowerment more than ever before.
Wasn't affirmative action responsible for creating much of the black middle class that we have?
Exactly.
Absolutely, but those people are still being empowered. Why are those connected elites still the beneficiaries of government empowerment when the focus should shift? Surely, if we want to tackle poverty and inequality, which are regarded as the evils in South Africa, to focus your policy interventions to deal with poverty and inequality. Why do we need to keep re-empowering through affirmative action, through BBBEE, through quotas, the same people who keep benefiting over and over again, who are fabulously wealthy? You can go and buy 5 Jeep Cherokees on the same day. I'd rather that our policies were focused on tackling the real problem in South Africa, which is poverty and inequality, and tackle it at source. You only need a proxy for disadvantage, or you only need a proxy for anything when you can't measure that thing. We can measure disadvantage in South Africa. It's South Africans who live below 1,000 rand a month. You don't need a proxy to work out who they are. It's a means-tested empowerment. You are earning less than 1,000 rand a month. You should be the beneficiary of a government redress and empowerment policy.
No, I wanted to ask about perhaps if you could take us into your political vision for the Democratic Alliance. I mean, after being in your position since November last year, what do you see, or what can you outline as the political vision for the Democratic, or the political direction for the Democratic Alliance under John Steenhuisen?
Well, we want to be the core of a new majority by 2024, so that we can bring to fruition the open opportunity society for all in South Africa. That is the ultimate goal. So there's these analysts who say, oh, well, the DA has given up on being a national government. We absolutely have not given up on being a part of national government. If you are a political party and you're not striving to get into power, you may as well not exist. You're then an NGO or a pressure group. I want the party to be into government, and I believe that there is a seismic shakedown in politics coming, and I want to be able to position the Democratic Alliance to be at the center, the rational center of South African politics, and to be a strong ally for the growth and prosperity agenda in South Africa, so that when that high stakes poker game comes, when the ANC falls below 50%, or there is a split within the ANC, that we have a significant pile of chips that we're able to put on the table to negotiate a way to ensuring that getting into government, but then ensuring that our vision and values are represented within that government.
So you don't buy into this notion of including those who have left the party and some who are still within the party, who go around saying that the DA is happy being a party running the Western Cape, the city of Cape Town, and they are just not interested in being in going outside this area.
It's fundamentally untrue, and I would never want to lead a party that was always fighting for second place. You want to be able to get into a position where you can bring your policies to bear. Otherwise, that is the whole point of politics. As we've seen in the Western Cape, as we've seen, you cannot make the change unless you're actually able to get into the driving seat in some form or the other. And as I said, if we're not striving to get into power, to change people's lives through our policies, then we're not really a political party then. And that's certainly not a party I would want to lead. I fundamentally disagree with this notion that the DA is interested in being a regional party, a sort of IFP of the Western Cape. Absolutely not. And that's why We are focusing our election campaign on trying to win as many municipalities as possible. I believe there's 22 municipalities across the country outside of the current ones we run in the Western Cape, where the DA is the second biggest party, and where no party's got more than 55% of the vote. Those are vulnerable municipalities that I think are available for us. And there's 11 in the Northern Cape. I was just looking at the figures today. 11 in the Northern Cape, there's 5 in Gauteng, there's 3 in the Eastern Cape, there's 2 in eThekwini, just by way of example. There's 22 of these municipalities, which I think there's a very good chance we can either win outright or become the significant chunk of a coalition. And we've got to use that then as the stepping stone into the 2024 campaign.
That was going to be my question, to say that where are your areas of growth?
In those 22 municipalities, I believe, municipalities, I think that this next election is going to be fought on 3 key issues. It's going to be fought on COVID-19 and the government's response to it. I think it's going to be fought on service delivery, and I think it's going to be fought on jobs and the economy. And I think people are going to be are so sick and tired of failing service delivery, of the rising unemployment, and of the government's lockdowns, etc., that there's a huge potential for us, provided we can get a credible alternative and offer on the table that is clear and unambiguous, and which sets out very clearly to those South Africans how we can change things. I think there's huge potential for the Democratic Alliance in this coming election.
So, John, the 22 municipalities, in which towns are we talking about?
Well, there's Namakwa, there's Hantam, there's all 3 metros in Gauteng, Nelson Mandela Bay, Beyers Naudé, there's eThekwini and Moyamgeni and KZN. I mean, I can get the broader list, but I mean, those are the key focus municipalities where I think we can get into power. And I think that why that's important, because it then provides a foothold in those provinces, much like it did in the Western Cape when we took the city of Cape Town, for you to be able to demonstrate your difference. You can put out as many pamphlets as you like. The thing that really shifts voters is when they feel, taste, and hear the difference in their lives as a result of a different way of governing. And I think that if we had not won the city of Cape Town, I think it would have been very difficult for us to then move on to win the province. So I would like to get beachheads in these other provinces to be able to demonstrate that those, and I would obviously like DA majorities, but the reality is there may be, you may have to work with other parties.
So you think you can now win with outright majorities in Pretoria or in Tshwane, in Johannesburg?
No, not in Pretoria and Tshwane, although we'd like to. And I think what people need to understand is that when one looks at the instability that has occurred in those cities, it is better to give us a stronger hand to be able to really turn things around. Particularly in Nelson Mandela Bay, I think that an outright majority there is within reach, provided we can get opposition voters registered and provided that we can get our voters out on election day. And as I say, I think that there's going to be a huge pressure on the ANC to turn out voters in a very depressed environment, in an economic depression, and in the midst of one of the highest unemployment crises in modern history in South Africa. It's going to be very difficult for them to excite their voters. So if we can get opposition voters out in big numbers, standing strong behind a political party that is that has a track record of delivery, of service, of change, of good, clean, accountable government, and building a capable administration, I think that there's huge potential in that.
You currently it's Nelson Mandela Bay, obviously, and Tshwane, right, and the
Cape Town,
the city of Cape Town. When you characterize the other two, not Cape Town, the other two, how have you done in government? Because most of the term, the 5-year term, those two cities were actually under DNA. How do you characterize how the team?
Nelson Mandela Bay or
Nelson Mandela Bay, Tshwane?
Well, I think that Nelson Mandela Bay spoke for itself. I mean, in the short-term time that we were in government there, the city's books went from being in debt to being back in the black. That we were able to deal with things like pit latrines and service delivery. We were able to deliver a metro police service. We were able to introduced ShotSpotter in to deal with gang violence, an IPT bus transport system, bus rapid transport system. The municipality went from being the worst metro in the country to do business with to the second best metro behind Cape Town. Its credit rating improved, and I think that there was a visible difference. And I think that one only needs to look back at the last year and a bit in Nelson Mandela Bay to see the backward slide. I think that Mayor Banga's administration now is going back to focus on getting those basics right. And it's a lot easier in a place like Nelson Mandela Bay because our majority is so much bigger. A place like Tshwane, it's a lot more difficult. Obviously, it's easier to govern a place when you've got your both hands on the steering wheel and you can steer it in the right direction. And when you've got a coalition, when you've got to bring along 6 other parties, it's a lot more complex because you've got people who are trying to put their own spin on the steering wheel. But it is a reality, and you've got to deal with it and manage it. Has the advancement in Tshwane and Joburg been as quick and as much as we would have liked? Absolutely not. But given the circumstances that were there at the time, and living from council meeting to council meeting, it makes it very difficult to be able to institute a program of action, which is why I really believe that if voters want to see the change in those cities, they've got to give a party a mandate to be able to get in there and change things.
Do you regret going into coalition with the EFF in Joburg?
Well, we weren't in coalition with the EFF. It was an arrangement of supply where they voted. They were never.
It was technically a coalition. They gave you votes.
But they were never part. They were never signatories to the multi-party coalition agreement. But
they supported you.
It was a coalition of supply where they would vote for budget and in no confidence. So I do regret some of it, and I'll tell you why. I think that what happened there, particularly in Joburg, is that the mayor started to dance to the EFF tune. And I think that is what happens when you come from business. You sometimes, see things in a different way. And so I think that the mayor, naively at the time, felt that if he just threw a few scraps to the crocodile, it would be happy. But over time, the crocodile became hungrier and hungrier. And it compromised your ability to govern cleanly and accountably, because then there's more demand around, well, we want the following people appointed. We want the vanilla fleet contract. We want this. And eventually it ends up compromised. So I think that the mayor made a business decision saying, well, let me look at my budget. If I've got to get my multi-billion rand budget passed, if I've got to throw out a few scraps to the crocodile, a couple of 100 million to the crocodile, I can write that off as cost of sales. The problem is it may work in business. In politics, it ends up compromising you. And that's exactly what happened to us. And eventually, the mayor was dancing to the EFF tune to the exclusion of his own caucus and to the exclusion of the other coalition partners who were really aggrieved by the fact that they'd arrive at a council meeting and the EFF would tell them what was going to happen. And the mayor hadn't taken the other coalition partners into confidence about what was going to happen. And it caused friction, A, within the caucus and B, within the broader coalition. And a lot of the coalition partners are very angry about that.
You would say that he was trying to hold the coalition together. Without the EFF, there wouldn't be much of a coalition. If that's what he had to have.
Yes, but there have to be red lines when you go into government. You cannot be in government for government's sake. Because the moment your core values and principles are compromised, then there's no distinction between you and administration's past. If you're turning a blind eye to corruption at the Johannesburg Roads Agency, if people are bringing you, like Mr. Phillips, are bringing you documents saying there is corruption going on here, and you turn a blind eye to it, if you are happy to turn a blind eye to the fleet tender stuff and the like, then eventually it compromises you, because the moment you then try and act against corruption elsewhere, people immediately say, oh, but hang on, you turned a blind eye here, what are you doing here? And you end up where the ANC is now, actually. Why the ANC is so paralyzed is because at every key step they've turned a blind eye to the small and Nyana skeletons of everybody within the party. That's the reason Ramaphosa cannot move against people in his own organization, because everybody knows everybody else's dirty little secret. And you can't govern like that. And that's why any new coalition that our party will commit to after the local government elections will be based on a written coalition agreement It'll have a chapter setting out the core mission and objectives. What do we hope to achieve in the next 5 years?
Yeah.
I'd like to try and get people to commit to a fixed-term coalition of, of at least 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
And it must set out the red line, saying the following will not be tolerated in the coalition: interference in administration, interference with appointments, interference with tenders, and those red lines. And that document must then be published openly to the public, so that when one of the coalition partners crosses those red lines, they understand then why you cannot stay in government and why you may then need to go back to the opposition benches and be a strong opposition rather than to be a bad government. Why this is important for the DA is because
I just need to ask you something.
why this is important for the DA is that our brand of good governance is one of our key distinguishers. It's also, ironically, across all race groups, the key driver of why people switch to voting for the DA. Well, they govern where they govern well. The moment you compromise that brand, it obviously then makes your brand proposition a lot harder to be able to sell.
I've got 2 questions flowing out of your responses. Number one is, then would you say that Mashaba failed as Joe Biden?
I think he tried, but I think that he went in politically inexperienced, and I think that naivety allowed people who've been in the game far longer to take advantage of him. There were some notable successes in Joburg. I mean, potholes got fixed. I think that there is a lot to be proud of there. But unfortunately, that has been tainted by the other stuff. You cannot say you're a better government if you're turning a blind eye to corruption. If you are, you're going after some people, but you're letting the vanilla fleet contract and the billions of rands there just simply slide under the radar.
So are there parties, my last question on this one, are there parties then that you won't touch going into coalitions, future coalitions, to say that no, not with these ones?
Well, I think we'd be very wary about doing business with the EFF going forward. But I'm not ruling out, but I think that it would come down to that document. Do you share the values, principles, objectives of this document? Do you subscribe to the red lines that are there? And are you prepared to commit to a term of office to bring stability to that municipality? If you are, we can do business. If you're not, we can't get a coalition together there, we'll go into the opposition benches and be the best opposition that we can be in that particular city.
You speak about the former mayor of Johannesburg dancing to the tune of the EFF, much to the disadvantage of his own caucus. What steps then did the DA leadership take to rein him in? Well, surely you didn't just see the
Of course, but there was a number of interventions. That's why he got very upset. I mean, we had to deal with a very unhappy caucus within the party. And I wasn't the leader at the time, but I certainly know that the leader at the time and various other structures were fielding complaints. The caucus was treated with complete disdain. And unfortunately, in a party political system, you've got to manage your own caucus first. That's the primary. You've got to bring your team along with you. And they felt excluded, marginalized, victimized, and excluded from decision making. They felt that the mayor was just behaving like he had been a directly elected mayor rather than a leader of a party caucus. And they would often find out things at council meetings and would often find out things from EFF councillors about what was going to happen, where things were going to, and it caused a huge concern. So in trying to address that, I think is what Mashaba says about, the DA, was more interested about principles than in governing. And he's absolutely right. I mean, you've got to lead your caucus, be first as your primary. You've got to bring your own team with you. And if you can't do that, and you try then use other people to drive your agenda, it is a huge problem. That is why they ended up being this juncture, and why I think he jumped. I think he was worried that there was going to be a motion of no confidence, a secret ballot, and that members of his own caucus, who had now become fed up with the way he had treated them, were going to vote against him.
And still on issues of possible future coalitions. How do you characterize the ANC? Do you see a good and a bad ANC, and would you be willing to work with a good ANC?
I don't believe that it's as binary as a good and bad. And I think that binaries like that are dangerous. I don't think there's a good and bad ANC. I think we've got one ANC that has let South Africa down badly. I do, however, believe there are reformers in the ANC who are pro the growth agenda. And I think there is potential for a realignment around the centre of South African politics, the rational centre of South African politics, which is where I think the DA needs to be able to play. So, I think that the president, he talks a lot about reform, and, if it was to come to a motion of no confidence in the House, would we support it? Absolutely not, because I'm certainly not going to open the door for David Mabuza or somebody else to become the President of the Republic of South Africa. But I think that what has come now in South Africa is the time for the reform, pro-growth, pro-constitution, those people who share the values of the rule of law, a free independent press, of economic growth and the reform agenda in South Africa need to start finding each other and to start talking to each other about the future. Because you can already see within the ANC, there is a fight back, and as I said to the President in the speech on the State of the Nation, the sands are shifting under your feet. The Tea Party, the Magashule factions growth and the like, the targeting of Mboweni, all of these are key indicators that the RET faction within the ANC is starting to resuscitate itself and to mobilize itself, and they pose a significant threat to the president and his ability. I mean, these ANC MPs who openly say to our MPs, the president's not going to be here after May. There's all these things. So the president's got problems with his own party, which is why I think that more than ever before, a strong centered party for growth at the center makes a perfect ally for the reform agenda within the ANC to find backing. And I've said to the president on many occasions, even in this last speech, just surely you can find 85 MPs on your side of the house to match our 85 and the others in the opposition to table your reform agenda and pass it. And the time's running out very quickly for the president. If he doesn't act now, he's going to find himself in a very, very difficult situation. So I think your broader question is, could we work with the ANC? Yes, absolutely. I think that if we have if we break the logjam of politics and are able to form a bulwark against radical socialism in South Africa, absolutely. And we'll work with anybody who shared the pro-growth agenda and really believed in that.
Their own internal fights then. Is it an opportunity? Is it time to take advantage? You see an advantage in...
Of course, and of course there's an advantage to it. That was one of the reasons why we're tabling the president's reform agenda in Parliament. We've taken the president and Tito Mboweni's documents that they've produced, the economic recovery plan, and we've started to gazette them as private members' bills. And this is going to give a test when these things come to committees in Parliament, and a committee votes against the bill or votes against the desirability of it. What they're essentially saying is, well, we don't believe in the president's agenda. And we've said, look, if you don't want our name on it, we'll take it off. You can make them committee bills. But for goodness sake, a reform agenda is no good in a drawer in the union buildings. It's got to have life breathed into it. The executive cannot make legislation. They can propose legislation. There's only one place the reform agenda is going to have life breathed into it, and that's right here in Parliament.
But given that he's come in, he's been president for however long,
3 years.
When you assess his performance, are there any sort of blue marks that you give him, not just red marks?
No,
are there things that you think he's really done well here, and we need to give him credit?
Look, I think that where he has done well are the areas when he's been able to stand up to his own party. So I think the reconstitution of the National Prosecuting Authority, and I think that has been a very good sign. I think his newsletter this week about standing up for the judiciary, a bit late, but we'll give him a blue mark for that. I think that his initial fundraising drive for South Africa started off very well, but got the rug pulled out from his own party. The president's biggest opposition lies within his own party, and that's the problem. I think that the early days of the handling of the pandemic, I think we'll give him a blue mark for that. Locking down hard and locking down early was the right decision to make. And then they lost the plot when they started to move away from science and focus on petty regulations and the like, and we moved away from a science-driven approach. Would I rather do business with Cyril Ramaphosa than Ace Magashule? Without a shadow of a doubt. That's not even a question. Does the president, believe in economic reform? I absolutely think he does believe in economic reform, which is why I've reached out to him on several occasions to say, we will back your agenda. Bring your proposals, bring your reforms, bring your amendments, and we will back them. You can survive a backbench rebellion. Because I think that what South Africa needs now more than ever before, given the terrible situation we're in, is a coming together to say, what are the 10 to 15 things we need to do for the next decade that are going to get us off this terrible trajectory of unemployment, high debt, low growth, and onto one of prosperity. And I think that putting ideology aside, I think we can find what those 10 to 15 things are, and I think we can focus like a laser beam on them, rather doing a few things really well, the things that really matter really well, than trying to do a lot of things very badly.
People write that, I know Barney also wrote about this, and they write that the reason why we have a de facto one-party state and there's no proper realignment is because the opposition is very weak. Is that a fair...
I disagree fundamentally. I mean, if you look at the rest of the continent, a party above 20% is not a weak party. In fact, you will struggle to find opposition parties that come even close to that anywhere on the continent. I think we've got a really strong opposition in South Africa, which is why I worry about the fragmentation of the opposition. But I don't think we've got a weak opposition. I think we've got an opposition that's done its job well.
Why is it so unable to break the ANC or to actually,
Well, I think there's a number of reasons for that. First, there's a lot of emotional connection to the ANC that is dissipating amongst younger voters particularly, which is why the DA is winning seats at Tibet colleges in Limpopo and taking wards off the ANC in Walter Sisulu district municipality and in rural Transkei. It's because those people are starting to see that there requires to be a change. I think there's an emotional connection, but I also don't think we've been good enough at landing the alternative offer. And that is one of the challenges now that as we go into this election, to be able to make the compelling offer so that people see the alternative. And it's no good just bashing the ANC in an election, which is why those poster choices that were chosen last election were people know why we're in trouble in South Africa. What they're looking for is the way out. They don't need a party that's shining a light showing how deep the hole is. They want a party that's shining a light showing the way out. And I think the DA has not made a compelling offer yet to South African voters that have been able to capture their imagination, and that is going to be the focus of this next election. How we get South Africa working, how we get South Africans back to work, and the plans that we can do it. What the DA has been very good at over the years is putting its head under the bonnet of the car and describing in great detail how the catalytic converter works, how the exhaust system works. When people get into the car, there's only two things they're thinking about. Where am I going? And what is the best way for me to get there? The DA's got to spend less time under the bonnet, technical stuff. It's got to focus more on describing the destination in greater detail and the journey to get there, the quickest journey to get there. So where do we want to see South Africa? What is the new horizon of hope in South Africa? And how do we get people there as quickly as possible? And we've got to do it in a compelling way as possible. Focusing less on the technicalities and more on the, on the stuff, the hope and aspiration that people have for themselves and for their families and for their loved ones. And I think that if we can get that right and to paint that future in spectacular technicolor and set out to them every step of the journey, I think that is going to stand us in far better stead than what we've done in the past, which is just saying, well, the ANC is rubbish, vote for us because we're not rubbish. Well, people know now why the country's in trouble. I think they're tired of the ANC. What they lack is that, is that horizon of hope and a party that can credibly lead them there. And that's where I want to position the DA in this local government election, but to then get the momentum out of that to go into 2024.
Good question. I think I have one more question. I'm done.
Ask your question.
Okay. Your own party's finances. We've heard rumors in political circles that you donors are dumping you. How's your...
That's not true. I think our finances are slightly better than yours. I also noticed that, we lost, 1.2% in the last year. You guys lost 44%, and nobody's calling you out. Yeah. So look, let me be honest. I mean, in a constrained economic environment, obviously, we rely largely on private donations.
Yeah.
It has been a really tough year and a half for South Africa.
Yeah.
So of course, the space is constrained.
Yeah.
But also what we've had to do is embark upon a process like media companies, like private enterprise, of restructuring to ensure that we bring our operational costs into our fixed income.
Yeah.
We don't ever want to end up in a situation like the Thuli House has on a almost monthly basis now, where they cannot pay salary.
For sure.
So our focus is on a restructuring and of the party to be able to ensure that our financial sustainability continues. The worst thing you want is not being able to pay your bills, getting your website confiscated because you haven't paid the accounts, etc. So our finances are in a very healthy state, but we are mindful of the fact that we're operating in a constrained environment. And the new Party Political Funding Act as well is also going to provide a significant constraint on our ability to raise money. So we're in the process of preparing ourselves to do the same work that we've been doing, but in a smarter way. So one of the things we're looking at in the Zoom environment, do we need big offices all over the place? Are we able to, do we need to fly people all around the country to a federal council? Can we use new technology to do so? So I think that it is the right thing to do, and it's a responsible thing to do, because I never ever want to see on the front pages of your newspaper that the DA hasn't been able to pay its salary. So that restructuring...
So you're going to work with like smaller staff, some retrenched people?
Well, we've already been through a process of retrenchment. We're probably looking at another one, depending on the financial forecasting and how this financial year ends. But donors are not dumping us. It's a matter of the size of donations, because many of them are trying to keep their own companies afloat and have had to step in to help employees, through this crisis, and they've got less money to spend. And if you speak to charities, religious organizations, they're all in the same boat. People have got less money. And as I said, the Party Political Funding Act is going to be a significant constraint on it.
Wasn't that such a, I mean, on the one hand, it's celebrated because of what happened with the ANC, where the ANC would go to SOEs and fundraise and Chancellor House and all of that. But at the same time, it also disadvantages other parties. I mean, the act.
The act is, a lot of people celebrate the act. I think when people look back in 10 to 15 years' time at this act, I think it's going to have done more damage to the country than good.
Sure.
And I'll tell you why. It's going to significantly constrain new entrants into the market, because existing political parties get funding from the IEC because they're represented in Parliament. Other smaller parties, will never be able to get that up. So much like the tobacco advertising established the existing brands and made it very difficult for new entrants into the market, the same thing's going to happen there. Secondly, it's going to penalize parties that are law-abiding and do the right thing. So, we will submit, and we will do the honest thing, and we will submit the books, etc.
But other parties
I can tell you other parties will not. And we've seen what's happened at the Zondo Commission. So you only need to understand that. Do you think that they will declare that's SSA money and that's been flowing in? So it's going to penalize parties that are law-abiding and respect the rule of law. Does there need to be greater transparency and accountability with money and party politics? Absolutely. There's always been an unhealthy tension between money and politics. But I think that with any piece of legislation, you've got to look past the target, the paper target. The bullet may hit the bullseye, but it's also going to go through it, and it can do damage on the other side as well. And that's the unintended consequences. And I think there are going to be unintended consequences of this bill on particularly opposition parties that are not in government, and therefore cannot rely on the largesse that they're able to siphon off, and particularly new entrants. So if there's a sudden new party that wants to form and there's enough for movement, they will be significantly constrained because they're automatically at a massive disadvantage from a funding perspective. And then, of course, there are going to be donors who do business with government, who are going to be reluctant to give money to an opposition party. They're going to say, well, if I give money to an opposition party and it's published, does this mean that my potential to supply PPE to the Department of Health and KwaZulu-Natal is going to be compromised? I think there will be an element of that. People will also lower their donations so that they come in just under the reporting threshold. So it's going to have a significant financial impact, and which is part of the reason why we are preparing ourselves for that particular eventuality.
How?
By doing a restructuring, by making sure, and obviously we're going to have to find a lot more smaller donors than relying on big donors to give to write the big checks. It's going to be a tough environment, almost as tough as the media environment.
John, what impact has the return of Helen had on the functioning of your structures and your electoral prospect as well? To what extent is she an asset or a liability to the DA?
Well, I think like every politician, you've got a balance sheet, you've got assets and liabilities, and you've got to just make sure the assets always outweigh the liabilities. I think Helen's assets far outweigh her liabilities. I think that what you're dealing with is somebody who was the most successful mayor of Cape Town, world's best mayor, who's run a city administration and knows what needs to be done to turn local government around. You've got the country's most successful post-apartheid premier, who not only spoke about building a capable state, she built one, who not only spoke about capable government, she built capable government, not only spoke about beating unemployment, she set out to promote economic growth and less people are unemployed. So who would not want to have her around the table? I tell you, I'd rather have her as my Secretary General than Ace Magashule. You want that person's feet around the table. You don't necessarily want their fingers on Twitter. And you would have noticed there's been a reduction in the tweeting. And she has been actively focused on the behind-the-scenes stuff around fixing the FLC processes, fixing selection panel processes, the Federal FCEC processes to ensure we've got a candidate selection process that's going to be able to bring out the best and brightest, ensuring our governments are operating at optimal level and making sure they're being monitored so we don't end up with a crisis in one of our governments. And I think as a party leader, you'd be crazy not to want that experience as part of your top table and team. So, like I probably have many liabilities. I'd like to think my assets outweigh them, and certainly with her, I think her assets far outstrip any liabilities that she made.
As a writer, is it not a bit difficult to have a former leader keeping watch on your time?
Not at all, and I think it's not unusual. William Hague stayed in Parliament for many years and served under David Cameron in his cabinet. You've had Theresa May is currently an MP in Boris Johnson's team. I think it's not unusual. It's not an unusual situation, particularly in our type of parliamentary system. She's not a public representative. She is a party function and party official. She's employed full time at our head office, and she's got her job to do, and I've got my job to do. And we respect each other's lanes. And for me, it's a huge relief knowing that there's somebody who is absolutely obsessed about dotting the I's and crossing the T's and making sure that the ball isn't dropped in our processes in the party, which frees me up to not have to micromanage the party to the degree that former leaders had to, and being able to get out there and do the politics, to do the front of house speaking, vision casting and vision sharing.
What has been, John, or rather, what has the party identified as a big problem with your FLC processes, or a weakness, or what has been the biggest complaint?
Well, I think it's been the delay in time about how the processes are. There were some complaints that people were being unfairly targeted, and the FLC was being used as a place to settle scores. So we've currently got a commission underway headed by a retired judge who is examining our processes, and people have made submissions to it, and that process has been led by Helen in terms of how we streamline it and how we ensure that we deal more with issues within the party, particularly when it comes to personality issues, at source rather than within the FLC. It will free up the Federal Legal Commission to be able to focus on the big stuff, the big cases that require that attention. The other stuff must be dealt with by chief whips and caucuses, by caucus leaders, and by provinces and regions. They must get people into a room and knock their heads together and sort them out and localize the problem solving. There's also been a tendency in the party to, when it comes to, this person supports me at a congress, so I don't really want to irritate him, so let me rather kick the problem upstairs to the FLC and let the FLC deal with it. And then the FLC ends up with these huge backlog, end up with a year, before cases heard, these delays. So all that's being looked at about how we streamline those processes to ensure that we have swift but fair justice within the democratic lines. And I'm really confident that the report that we'll be able to bring to Federal Council in a month or two's time is going to really make sure we've got a process that's fit for purpose and doesn't end up like the Integrity Commission, which just gets ignored.
Who's the retired judge?
Traversa, Dana Traversa.
Thank you so much.
That it?
John? Yeah, great.
You're not going to ask me about
interview.
Mashaba and all these...
No, we've asked you about Mashaba. You've given us mouthful. Happy?
Sounds like John has something to get off his chest. He's welcome to tell us, right?
Yeah, if you want to say more about Mashaba, hey?
No. I just think it's strange that that he's now trying to lead this realignment of the opposition. I'm a poker player, and I've never sat down at a poker table and been able to play without chips on the table. So I do find it a bit strange, but nonetheless.
I'll put that in focus.
So which one of you made me the Mampara?
No. It wasn't me. It wasn't us.
Okay.
We'll blame it on the editor. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys so much. Yeah.